All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Lauren Burnham, and I'm the Assistant Director here at the American Swedish Historical Museum. Welcome. Today's is our third Thursday virtual program series. We're thrilled to bring you this year-long series of virtual tours to mark the museum's 100th anniversary. Our goal is to provide virtual learning opportunities to celebrate the centennial with our long-distance community. Today's talk will explore local ancestral indigenous trails from the 17th century. A few housekeeping things before we get started. We just ask that everyone please keep yourselves on mute during the presentation to minimize any background noise that might occur. If you have questions, feel free to put them right in the chat feature. Otherwise, hang on to them, and at the end of the talk, we'll review those questions and invite people to unmute, and you can ask and have a chat live with us. So, with that, it's my pleasure to introduce today's lecturer, Robert P. Thompson,
Thomas.
AI Thomas. Sorry, Robert P. Thomas, AIA, who is a partner at Campbell Thompson Thomas and Company Architects, a firm noted since 1976 for historic preservation, sustainability, and community development. Trails, greenways, affordable housing, energy consciousness design, and accessible designs. Bob has served for several decades on the city's historical commission, 8 of those as chair, and 10 years on the accessibility advisory board. He has served on boards of numerous nonprofit organizations oriented to preservation, conservation, and community revitalization. Bob shares his passion for the junction of history and trails by giving lectures and leading tours for numerous organizations in eastern Pennsylvania, southeastern New Jersey, or southern New Jersey, and northern Delmarva Peninsula. So, with that, it is my pleasure to turn it over to you, Bob. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Good, and thank you very, very much, Lauren. It's a real pleasure to be here. People ask me, they say, "You're an architect. What in the world are you doing trails?" And I think that what I've learned over the years, and it's really how we started our firm 50 years ago, is that you can have buildings, but transportation is such a big part in the design of communities and systems and livable areas and so forth, that it's something that Jim Campbell and I met over actually starting the Schuylkill River Trail. It was our first project, and we did that as volunteers through the Sierra Club. And lo and behold, we ended up becoming regional trail experts and just working to link things together and make things walkable, bikeable, and so forth. But it also led us way back into history. In finding and laying out trails, we discovered that there's a lot that influenced trails early on in the area, both the Native American trails in Pennsylvania, New Jersey, Delaware that we saw, but also things like the layout of railroads and so forth. So, putting that together with an interest in history and an interest in trails, some not too long ago, I had pushed for about 10 years to commemorate the Great Minquist Trail, which goes from the Susquehanna River to the mouth of the Schuylkill, uh, and has now been really recreated as the Great Schuylkill and Susquehanna Passage, which is a state major greenway. And I think was it Tracy who saw the talk that I gave on trails and whatnot, and said, "Could we do something in the 1600s during the Swedish period?" And I said, "Well." I called up Rails to Trails Conservancy. They said there weren't any railroads then to convert. So it took some very tricky research to find out where things were and to talk about them. So with that, I'm going to start the PowerPoint. Let me do that right now. Um, Start the slideshow. Back. There we go. Okay. Um, this is a map that, seeing some of the people who are attending, I realized that I am an architect. We design buildings and trails and sustainable transportation. I do not have a degree in history, but I have a passion in it, as does my wife, Nancy. And we spend a lot of time visiting, looking at places and learning about things. But I know that I'm going to learn a lot and get a lot of comments from at least several of you, either corrections or enhancements or other things. And I really enjoy learning that way. So please feel free to speak up to correct something or add something. This map, known as the Quantic map, which was actually prepared during the WPA period in the 1930s, almost 100 years ago. The Quantic map shows Philadelphia region as first seen by the white men, as it says, with native villages and so forth and so on. And it does give an idea of where people were and so forth. It extends much farther than what you see here. So this is one of the first things that I started to look at. Let's go page down. But the other thing was a quick glance at the Encyclopedia Britannica, just showing where New Sweden was. I know people are surprised when they see the Mounds Jones house in Berks County, and wow, I thought all of New Sweden was down near Governor Prince Park, but actually it extends into Swedesboro and other parts, as well as northern Delaware. Um, Lenape occupied most of the area of New Sweden. And this is a map of tribal lands. And then there's also a map that I found of where the various dialects were. So you can see the Southern Unami dialect here includes most of what was New Sweden, but there are the other dialects of the Unami as well. So this was just to find out where things really were. But I said, well, let's take a look at what was here when the Native Americans got here 10,000 years ago. Things have changed, but not that much in 10,000 years. And what you can see is New Sweden. Here's Delaware Bay. Here's Cape May. And New Sweden comprised what's now northern Delaware, this part of New Jersey. Here's Philadelphia. The American Swedish Museum is right here in FDR Park. But what you can see is there's the Delaware River working its way up. Here's New York Harbor. As you get further up, you notice that you have the Kittatinny Ridge here. That's where the Appalachian Trail goes all the way across. The Delaware Water Gap is right here, and you get into the Pocono Plateau and on up into the Catskills. And then here you see the Finger Lakes. And finally, here's Lake Ontario. But in our area, what's really important is we still have this huge forest of the Pine Barrens. And of course, the coastal areas as well were important. People had Indian trails to get through the pines, to get to some villages that were here. No one ever lived on these barrier islands where there's lots of flooding and storms today, Atlantic City and elsewhere. But they did go there to do the same thing that we do, to get crabs and fish and really enjoy themselves in good weather. Over here, of course, there was a very close connection to Chesapeake Bay and other tribes as well. The other thing, of course, is that not all the trails were local. They went elsewhere, just like our highway network does today. Here's the Susquehanna River going up through an area of lots of cliffs. Then it gets up here to Harrisburg and into the Ridge and Valley country. You can see all the mountain ridges here that are sliced through by the Susquehanna and other streams. So the great Minquist Trail came from the Susquehanna and came across and worked its way down here to the mouth of the Schuylkill to what was called Fort Manayunk, not Manayunk, the neighborhood that we know today, but down here, bringing all the beaver pelts and whatnot. We'll talk about that later. But let's go to the next slide. So, of course, Native Americans first found all the waterways that were here. And of course, everybody knows the Delaware Bay and the Schuylkill River, but other creeks were important too. Some were easy to navigate, others much more difficult. And of course, Philadelphia, the Schuylkill River was tidal up to East Falls originally, before they built the dam in the 1800s at the waterworks. The Delaware River is tidal all the way up to Trenton here. So, and then you have all the creeks that penetrate New Jersey as well as Pennsylvania and Delaware. Many of these were used for navigation even by small steamboats up until 100 years ago. So the waterways made were of tremendous importance to our Native American predecessors. And then, of course, the other thing that they looked at in figuring out where to go, well, here are some settlements, was the quality of the streams. Some were very difficult, here's the Delaware River, here's the Schuylkill. But then over here, you had the Susquehanna. This is getting over into there it is, Chesapeake Bay and the Susquehanna River. And this is interesting. This is a map from 1670 by Augustine Herman, and there's still an Augustine Herman highway that goes down through northern Delaware and Maryland into the eastern shore. And what it says here, the great Susquehanna River runs up northerly to Sinicus, about 200 miles above diverse rivers and branches on both sides to the east and west, full of falls and and isles until about 10 or 12 miles above the Susquehanna Fort, and then it runs down clear downwards, not navigable, but with great danger with Indian canoes by Indian pilots. And if you've ever canoed the lower part of the Susquehanna, you know that's true. You want to go with somebody who really knows the river because it is quite dangerous. So obviously they needed trails as well to get to places. So let's take a look here. Yeah. So here we have a map um, of trails of Pennsylvania that was prepared in the 1950s. I'll get onto that in more detail. But I copied here a section of it of southeastern Pennsylvania, south central, and then enlarged it here around Philadelphia. What's really interesting is you can see trails, and we'll talk about them, the Perkiomen Path going up the Schuylkill, the Mincy Trail here, Falls Trail. There's the Great Minquist going down to Fort Manayunk. And one of the questions is, well, can we see them today? And the answer is that these were laid out with such care to avoid crossing streams, to follow ridges like this is actually on Ridge Avenue. And over here, you're on Bethlehem Pike, and you know that they avoid going across a lot of streams. They save it all up for one or two crossings. And that was a way of avoiding, floods and whatever, keeping your moccasins dry, so to speak. So a lot of them were land routes. What's interesting is this section of the Great Minquiths. We laid this map over a map of current railroads in our office, laying out the September 11th National Memorial Trail across Pennsylvania a few years ago. And here's the Great Minquist out here in Lancaster as it leaves Chester County. That Octoraro Creek is the boundary between Chester County and Lancaster County. This is the Susquehanna River. Here's York County. But you can see that the trail made a big sweep and then came back again. Well, we went up and looked at Amtrak and said, my God, this is the Amtrak line between Philadelphia and Harrisburg. And the Great Minquist Trail is right between tracks 2 and 3. Here's the Great Minquist, if you put a dotted line on the ground. And one day I was taking the Pennsylvanian out for business in Harrisburg, and I went up to the cafe car to get a coffee, and we'd just gone through the gap, and the train lurched to the right and lurched to the left. And I asked the attendant, I said, how long have you been working on Amtrak? So, about 4 years, 5 years. And how do you like it? Oh, it's fine. I said, well, you saw where we made a big lurch here at Gap, Pennsylvania. She says, yeah, it really is. Train swings around every day. And then I told her, well, this was the Great Minquist Trail. And if you were here 10,000 years, if you were here 400 years ago, you would have seen Susquehannock and Lenape Indians carrying beaver pelts on this route. And she said, this train ride will never be the same. And I think that's a lot of the reason why it's worth learning about these trails and their history is there's so many roads that you take today. I think almost everybody who's been to grade school in Pennsylvania has heard about the walking purchase of William Penn, and how his sons defrauded the Native Americans of their lands. But to know, and some of these roads have names like the Lackawanna Trail or the Mincy Trail, and it just rolls off their tongue without any knowledge of why that's so important. And I think learning about these trails is a part of it. One of the things that I was concerned about in looking at Native American trails or indigenous trails was indigenous lodging. There weren't Marriotts or other things. If we go back to this Herman map, where is it? There. Here you can see north is to the right here. Here's the Delaware River. Here's Delaware Bay. And you can see there are all kinds of settlements pointed out here along the river. But then you get over here into South Jersey and it said says New Jersey, part of it, at present inhabited only or mostly by Indians, right? And it's interesting also because they describe the land. What you can see are all these indigenous settlements. And you see these buildings. And he drew these buildings in 1670 to indicate this is where Native Americans lived. Well, if you go ahead here, this is what they look like. And it was only recently that Nancy and I got out on a bike tour of Lancaster County. We went to the Hanner House, which is supposedly the oldest house standing in Lancaster County. It's just east of Willow Street or south of Lancaster. And the folks there have actually rebuilt at full scale, to the best of their knowledge, what one of these light native longhouses would have looked like. And if you haven't seen it, it's really something else. These are not carpets. These are like long sections of tree bark from apparently very large trees acting as roofing. And then they weren't stupid. They had a very high ceiling here. And the reason was in the summer, you know how hot it gets in buildings. But if you have skylights, first of all, you get some light, and you also have all the hot air has a place to escape. Open up the door at night, let the cool air through and cool things down. So a lot of the features that we use in passive architectural design today were mastered by Lenape and other peoples of long ago who understood their environment, and this shows that they certainly did. Well, let's take a look at what were some of the trails. The Great Minquis I mentioned, a big trade route for the Schuylkill River from the Susquehanna, and the Minquis, or the Susquehannock people, and the Lenape used it to trade furs with the early Dutch, Swedish, and English settlers, and it cut through Chester and Delaware County, and we'll see some markers of that. Uh, I think everybody knows Allegheny Avenue in Philadelphia. Do you realize that that's the Allegheny Path? And it was a gateway to the west. It began near what's Allegheny Avenue. There's a ford that's shown on old maps in Fairmount Park, right near Laurel Hill Cemetery, of the Allegheny Ford. And then it went and crossed it there and went through Ballackinwood, and then westward through Paoli and Morgantown, largely on what's the Lincoln Highway, or the old Lancaster Road, or Route 30. Another major north-south route, the Mincy Path, went north. It led out of Philadelphia northward to New York and New England, but was adopted and later became Bethlehem Pike. I am so excited about the part of Bethlehem Pike in Fort Washington that because of the development of the 309 Expressway, 309 was removed from the area near Fort Washington, and it still retains all of its colonial features of old walls and buildings and so forth. So it's a place where you can't get back to the Mincy Trail days, but you can certainly get to 100 years after that if you enjoy the peace between Skippack Pike and this town of Fort Washington. The Perkiomen Path, a lot of people know the Perkiomen Trail today, but it's actually was a trail that headed over towards Norristown and went to Reading. It's largely Route 422 today, and then the two joined at Norristown. There's also the Great Wagon Road. That went out of Philadelphia on Germantown Avenue, but back about 30 years ago, the city of Philadelphia ran into a big problem. This was a crossing of Native Americans on this great trading path. It was Route 422. And Germantown Avenue, if you know Philadelphia, you think of it being in Germantown and Chestnut Hill, but it actually starts way down near the Delaware River. And that was a road that went all the way to North Carolina, and it's commemorated many places along that route. But the bridge there was being taken down and replaced, and there was a big battle over whether that bridge, which dated back to the 1790s, should be changed with a bridge that had a sweeping curve. It was a very sharp turn at the bottom of the big hill on Germantown Avenue. And Dick Tyler, who was then the head of the Philadelphia Historical Commission, under whom I served, um, I was involved in that with the streets department. And I went out there and I said, "Chick, this thing's from the 1700s. Why is it so wide? It's 3 lanes." He said, "It was the Great Wagon Road." So this was a route that established by Native Americans. And if you look at a map, and we can do this later, and you look at the hills, it's one way that you can get out of Philadelphia going on this route eventually to the Lebanon Valley, to the Cumberland Valley, and that takes you all the way down past Shenandoah into North Carolina without going over any mountains, but going through them and along them. So this was a very important colonial route. There's a great book on it, which I'm reading right now. There are historical markers through our region. The Minquist Trail, there it is. This is one of them. Susquehannock crossing River Ridley Creek. Um, the Pennypack, the trail that you saw on the map of Pennsylvania that goes up along the Delaware River was a Lenape Indian trail. It was an old crossing. And the oldest bridge in the country still in continuous use is the Pennypack Creek Bridge. It was widened in 1893, as you see on the sign. But other than that, it's essentially unchanged. It looks like it's from an earlier age, which it is. The upstream side is the part that wasn't touched, and you can go and enjoy that anytime. Um, Another trail that I've enjoyed hiking on the Appalachian Trail and connecting it was the old Tulpehocken Path from Sunbury, which is on the Susquehanna River. It came diagonally and crosses over a number of places, Pilgrim Rouge Spring, all sorts of other things, on and on and on to Philadelphia. And there occasionally you'll see old highway maps, and they'll label or old maps of Pennsylvania where they labeled them with the old Indian names as well as the U.S. highway numbers. Um, this is both a amazing but also a sad story. We were working on making the borough of Rose Valley in Delaware County. I got a call one day from someone there, and they said, we have a real problem. Rose Valley Road, our main road, is a narrow road with very narrow shoulders. It's a state highway and it's unwalkable. But people, many of our roads, which are walkable in the town, and we have walking paths also, come to this road. There's no way to make connections, and we want a side path. Well, when I went there, I found this marker along the side. And this said, I have it blown up here. The Great Trail, Minkles or Susquehanna Indians, Susquehanna to the Schuylkill, crossed Ridley Creek at Long Point. And they have this bas relief of the Native Americans and these pelts right here, on and on and on. And there was a beaver. Unfortunately, the beaver was stolen about 4 years ago. And unless someone else knows, I don't believe it's been returned. There was a reward put up for it. It was really sad that that happened. But this, of course, is important in terms of what it commemorates. And there are any number of other signs. You can look them up on the Historic and Museum Commission list of historic markers and find out about a lot of the paths this way. Now let's go to the next page. What about New Jersey? New Sweden certainly goes over into New Jersey, and there are many names in New Jersey which are Swedish. Moluccas, for example. There's other ones. The Molucca River's over here. So you can see there's this Salem Trail, which is also in this list here. The Cohansey Trail is also known as that, and of course you know that New Jersey sits on top of a huge freshwater aquifer called the Cohansey Aquifer, which was the reason that the Pine Barrens were saved to prevent that from being polluted. So you see the name Cohansey, and it went down basically along the New Jersey side of the river from Burlington through Camden, Gloucester, Salem, and Cumberland counties all the way to Cape May. And that's, you can see coming down here, there's the Cohansey Trail going to Cape May. And of course, there were villages here there were Swedish settlements here, and then as you got further down, it was all Native American in the 1630s. Let's go back to the list. There we are. There was the old Cape Trail. The Falls of the Delaware is at Trenton. Tidewater extends up to there. Large ships could go as far as Trenton, and that's why beyond Trenton and Burlington and Bordentown, there were a series of canals that were built in the early 19th century. But because the river ceased to be navigable for large ships. But anyway, that cut across the Pinelands to Summers Point. And you can see seasonal migrations to the Atlantic coast. I think that's something that many of you may do, or you know people who enjoy seasonal migrations to the Atlantic coast, Atlantic City, Cape May, Ocean City, Summers Point, anywhere. And they did just what we do, gathered oysters, clams, and fish during the summer months. I have my some of my favorites, the red-eyed crab down along the Orinocan and other places in the middle of nowhere. But anyway, so this is modern Route 9. And of course, I always say that highways are like geology, it comes in layers, right? So the old Cape Trail is the oldest layer of a coastal travel route that was replaced eventually by the road that the old road, it was Route 9, and that in turn was replaced by the Garden State Parkway today. So you can trace your way back looking at one layer to the other as to how people got along. And then, of course, there are networks around Egg Harbor Road, which goes down from Batstow to the Cape. Let's take a look here. Righty. Burlington to Cape May. Burlington was the county seat. It's now Mount Holly of Burlington County, but very old, very important place. Also extraordinary in that it has no railroad or road along the river. So if you haven't been to Burlington, you can drive there or take uh, the trolley that runs from Camden to Trenton, the river line, get off in Burlington and walk towards the water, and it's just all unspoiled. It just goes right up to the river because there's the current travel routes are set way back. But as you see here, we connected Burlington with Cape May as well. And then you also had a trail running east that came into Tom's River, which had other names, which are on the map. I'll show you in a moment. It goes to almost directly eastward and went from Camden to the resources of Tom's River and also all the other seafood that would be harvested there. This photo here is the interior. This is not in New Jersey. This is the Hare House. At the Hare House, this is the what's known as the Lancaster Longhouse. You saw the outside of it a moment ago. This is one picture of the interior with a very high ceiling. All the hot air can go up and go out these vents. And of course, there's row after row of places where people slept. Let's go back. Yeah, there we are. So this road here, the Camden to Toms River, is actually right here. Here it's called the Burlington Trail. You also have this Manahawkin Trail, and of course, there's Manahawkin down here, which people know of. But this is all dense pine barrens. This is the Great Egg Harbor River in here, and then you have you have the Mullica and the Mullica River here, the Batstow River here, the Wading River here. All these are great canoe routes today. There's where Chatsworth's located, and you can see the old name Chemong. In fact, that's Chemong Township, and the name was changed to long. But here you see this is basically Route 206, the old Cape Road, coming down from Burlington and shooting across the Pine Barrens down here. So lots of precedents and lots of names. Um, One of the things, which I'll show you in a moment, is along the Manahawkin Trail, there was a convergence of 5 different trails here, and they're still there. And what's happened is this road here, of course, is a 4-lane highway, which becomes a 2-lane highway, which down here becomes a 1-lane, and eventually it's a sand road. And so when you walk along this old Washington Road or this trail, some of it's the Batona Trail, you're on the Manahawkin Trail, which has been there probably 10,000 years. But there were also taverns all along the way. People had to refresh themselves and take care of their horses, whatever. And there's a vacant town, one of the ghost towns or lost towns of New Jersey is the site of Washington. This was Washington where many trails, many things crossed, even in both Native American trails as well as trails and now sand roads here that we use. This other road trail here is now largely now the White Horse Pike going to Atlantic City. So, and in here you can see this is an aerial photograph, and Washington is right here. You can see all these roads. You can really get lost down here, and this road looks wider because they've widened it as a fire break. But when you're in this village here, you'll see ruins, which I'll show you in a moment. All right, well, let's continue. So those are some of the trails. And the question was, where did people stay? And they probably were welcomed at the longhouses. So here I blew up a bit of the Augustine Herman map, and you can see he drew in pictures of longhouses. So uh, this is probably what it looked like. And of course, the people at the Hare House have done a lot of research and building it. Wonderful details. Here's a fireplace. Up above, you can see this section here open to let hot air out, also to let smoke out. And then they had all kinds of storage. And, they've worked very hard to find the original knots and lashings and put that on. There were sleeping places on both sides stacked up. And here you can see even a little toy for some young Lenape, probably young girl. So this is what you might have seen if you were traveling in that period of New Sweden through the Native American villages. This is just showing you a larger photo of what this recreation of the longhouse looks like. And here you can see it's right here on Hare Road, Herr. And this is where the Hare House is, and there are other things. But this organization as well constructed this building right here. So I talked in words, but here you can see this is a current USGS, United States Geological Survey national map. And I picked this one because you can see major roads. There's the Jersey Turnpike, there's 295, I-95, etc. Here's Trenton. These are not all the trails, but this is the Mincy Path we talked about following Bethlehem Pike. And you can see this is where Bethlehem Pike used to be Route 309, and they built the 309 Expressway in the 1960s over here to near Glenside. So that a lot of that survives up here as really in its original width with original buildings on each side and original walls. And right now, near Hope Lodge, we're on the team led by NV5, which is putting the cross-county trail through there. And we're very much aware of this Native American history as well as the colonial and other history, and trying to see that that's respected and also interpreted. The Perkiomen Path came out of Philly, went up probably Ridge Avenue, came down to Norristown. It passed Perkiomen Creek and then went up here. There was probably a trail that followed the creek, Perkiomen Creek, as a valley as well. Of course, that ended up being a railroad, and that railroad is now the well-known Perkiomen Trail, which is also functioning as a section of the Pennsylvania Highlands Trail. The Allegheny Path here, we talked about coming out of the city, largely following the Lincoln Highway, which is US 30 today. And of course, the Great Minquis, which here's Fort Manayunk coming out here, working its way up and following what's now some of the Amtrak line, et cetera, and heading over. In New Jersey, there's the Cohansey Trail from Burlington coming down. And then as New Jersey projects out to the west, cutting through what's now farmland and would have been forest then. But here you can see all the forests here, the Pine Barrens, and all these trails that cut through the Pine Barrens, and there's some roads that do today. People don't realize when they're driving along Route 30 here, or they're over here, there's not another paved road until you get up to Route 70. So there's really a lot to see in here. And enjoying this, which we'll do on the tour in September, or late August and September, that I have planned as a companion event to this talk today, we'll actually get over and hike on some of that trail. Now, I'll show some pictures of what that looks like. So, if you want to get out, how do you do it? Well, here's yours truly with some friends. We took the train over to Hamilton, rode on back roads up to one of my favorite breakfast places, the Red Barn Cafe Pie Bakery and Farm Market. After we were filled on that, we came to the Wharton Forest. In that process, we passed some old bridges. Look at this wonderful old sign going back in history, built by Works Progress 1935 to 6. We got to the Pleasant Mills Church, 1808. And I love these buildings that have their original siding and they're not all quite the same size. And look at the nice windows. Why there are two doors, I don't know. I haven't had a chance to ask anyone. Also in this area, there was an Indian reservation called Brotherton. Here it is. And it was founded by the legislature since 1758. And there were people involved in creating a self-supporting community. But they did eventually they were forced out of there, and I think many of them died on the way to Oklahoma or elsewhere. There are other signs here too you can find. One of the last Delawares in the state, and Indian Ann, and you can look up her history as well. But as we explored, some people came riding along. Now, when this was an Indian trail, it would have been much narrower. Most of them were just one person wide. And so many of them that are still there, that are trails like this one, that part of the Manahawkin Trail, is wide enough for a Jeep to come down or two horses. But when we got down to Washington, look at this foundation wall. This is old limonite, which is the stone that's found in the Pine Barrens that has iron in it. It was used in all the iron, which was extracted in all the iron furnaces, like at Batstow and elsewhere. There were furnaces all through the Pine Barrens. But the basement cellar hole is still there. And here's myself and some people on a hike one February day surveying it. Out in the middle of nowhere, just hearing what the Japanese call the Matsukaze. You know what a kamikaze is? It's the wind of war. The airplanes, well, the matsu is pine tree and matsukaze is pine wind. And this is a wonderful place to hear it. So we'll get to see that. So that's in New Jersey where we've done some exploration. It was easier because they crossed the Pine Barrens and the Pine Barrens were protected to find things that feel very much like they would have then. But what about the Pennsylvania side? I started taking a look, I started looking up things on the Great Minquist Trail, and a piece of this map came up in Google search, and it said Island Road, Jones Lane. I had no idea where Jones Lane was. And I said, God, if I could find this map. And I did find it's in a book called Where Pennsylvania History Began. And I mentioned this to a very good friend, Mary Ellen Weber, who has a passion for history. She did a lot of work at the Athenaeum in the past and elsewhere. And she said, well, let me see. Well, she called me up one day and says, Bob, you need to come over to our apartment right now. So I had to run over. And she had a copy of this book that she had gotten. And it even was inscribed. Here's the title page, sketch and map on the trip from Philadelphia to Centennial-year. This was done in 1926. Henry Paxson was the vice president of the Colonial Society. And what's so amazing is he started at City Hall and he went all through this area down here near Fort Manayunk and the other forts. He went all the way down to Tinicum Island, where Governor Prince was set. And he describes in great detail each road and gives mileages. So with that, I was able to go after a search for Jones Lane. You'll see also here it says the book is inscribed for Ormond Rambo and by his friend, the author, Henry Paxson. Really impressive. And then another thing inside this book was put together, if you haven't seen it, in commemoration of the visit to New Sweden by their Royal Highnesses, the Crown Prince Gustav Adolf and the Crown Princess Louise of Sweden in the year of 1926, the 300th anniversary of the signing of the Charter of the Swedish South Company by King Gustavus Adolphus. Well, with this map, I went crazy. And what I was able to do was to say, okay, let's take a look. And so these are pages from Paxton's book. And this is, I said, well, let's try. He did his work in the early 1920s and published the book in 26. in time for the anniversary of the country. And I found the best map was 1895, the Brompton's Atlas. Here it is, Brompton's Philadelphia Atlas. And here's Island Avenue. Here's the Philadelphia and Reading Railroad Chester line. There was a train station at Bell Road, it says. Well, this is now the airport line. And this is still Island Road. And here's Jones Lane. And it said that right at the end, at Mingo Creek, he's describing it in his book. This is actually where the furs were traded, and the Native Americans would the people could take off. These streams were all navigable at the time, especially Mingo Creek. So this is a map then using if you use Philadelphia geohistory, they have about of the hundreds of maps they've taken about, I say, 60 or 70 of them and stretched and tugged them all to be the same scale, and you can turn on different layers. So here's the 1895 map, and I turned on the current roadway system. There's Island Avenue, right? And there's the airport line. So you can see Island Avenue hasn't moved. There's Bell Road Station. But Jones Lane has disappeared entirely, but I was able to find out where it is. Mingo Creek is now an open sewer line, a drainage line. So you can find that. And this, of course, was Penrose Avenue. But the Penrose Avenue Bridge is different from that. So I was able to find all these things. And yeah, here's I-95. So by being able to compare these, we were able to locate it in detail. And we did do a bike tour down there and actually got off, and there's an old rail line we were able to follow here through this area and down into the marshes and eventually came out to Fort Mifflin. What's so amazing in this book is in his travels, Paxton went down Passyunk Avenue. And what you can see here is the old Penrose Ferry Road. The Penrose Avenue Bridge now, this was a ferry, and then there was a swing bridge here. This road was abandoned in the 50s when they built the big high bridge that you go over today, the George Platt Bridge. And that's right here. This is now the Southwest Sewage Treatment Plant. But you could still get into here, and there are pieces of Fort Mifflin Road that we followed that then faded out. There's Fort Mifflin. We were able to get there and then onto the rail bed and get down to the fort and see all these things. But this was just amazing. And in describing going through South Philadelphia, it hadn't been developed yet. So it's the only photos I found of farmland along Passyunk Avenue in South Philly. And then here he has the very end of Jones Road, right here. Photographed by Henry Paxton, 1916, terminus of Minquist Indian Trail, now Jones's Lane, King Sessing. Separated the properties of Jonas Nielsen and Captain Leslie Koch on Minquist or King Sessing Kill. Kill, of course, is Dutch for stream, and like Schuylkill and King Sessing. So, and then the Nielsen's Indian Trading Post ruins are in the middle here. And then what he said here, this is taken at the same time. At the terminus, and it says, since photograph was taken, has been partially obliterated. So this might have been the last photo taken of the trading post that existed down there where the Lenape and the Susquehannock came. This was just really exciting to find this information. And, when you go down, you actually can get the feel of being out in the marshlands because there still is a lot of area that has not been plowed under. And of course, there's been a lot of preservation with John Heinz National Wildlife Refuge, Fort Mifflin. Also, the East Coast Greenway goes through there, the 9/11 Trail, the Washington Rochambeau Revolutionary Route is coming through this area. So there's a lot of attention now in an area that really had been turned over to industry entirely. Let's go one ahead. So what's the lesson from these trails? Part of it is understanding the purpose and how people lived, but the other was being inspired, as I have been, by the incredible knowledge and skill. You saw that comment, like the only way to go down the Susquehanna River is in an Indian canoe piloted by an Indian guide because they know the area. And I said, well, I have the great fortune to have been born in Philadelphia, and except for 2 years in the Peace Corps in Micronesia, I've lived here and explored my entire life, a large area from Delaware Bay up to the Poconos and from the Allegheny Ridge to the ocean, and have a good sense of where things are. So trails began in this area in the modern age. There was a great development of parks in the 19th century through the early 20th, Fairmount Park, things like that. But it was only really beginning in the 1970s that trails became a big issue with the development in our area of the Schuylkill River Trail and then many others. So we started looking, those of us involved in that, at, well, what were the resources that were here? And that's when the Rails to Trails Conservancy was founded, because the railroad system in our country peaked in 1918, and it's been getting smaller ever since. There was consolidation that occurred, and then starting really in the 50s, a massive abandonment of service and eventually of lines. And a lot of these cut through very difficult areas for cycling, but they make wonderful trails. So there was a lot of trail work going on, but it was all until about 15 years ago in this area, very disconnected. This little community was building its trail, and Rose Valley was doing its sidewalk, and somebody else was doing this, and the William Penn Foundation funded a lot of trails. And they said, but we're getting tired of all these different disconnected projects. We need something that brings them together. So I was one of the people that was asked to save on a team that they organized about 15 years ago to develop a network of trails in the area. And of course, one of the things we looked at was this wonderful 1949 map, Philadelphia Freight Facilities in Philadelphia City. This was a map drawn just before abandonments began in the 50s. So there are all kinds of railroads. Like here's the Gresham line, the Fort Washington branch. That's now a trail in part and becoming an important trail. The Plymouth branch, that's connecting over here to the Wissahickon Trail. You have the Pennypack Trail, which goes out of right now. You can take a train right to Fox Chase and get right off the train and get on this trail. It goes all the way out to Newtown in Bucks County, and will eventually go over to the Delaware and Lehigh Canal um, over on the Delaware River near Yardley. You have the old Bustleton branch that we're looking at, the old North Pennsylvania Railroad. Another one here. This was the original line to Bethlehem, started at Third and Berks and went up this way. And later on, when the Reading Railroad built Wayne Junction and made this connection here, this line withered away. Now it's gone. And we did an opportunity assessment last year for the Pennsylvania Environmental Council of using this and creating a greenway right through the heart of North Philadelphia. So this is something that would benefit loads and loads of people. So over here, you can see this is the current map of trails in the circuit, either completed in blue, and the other sections are planned or under development. I'm glad to say some of the planned or under development sections have already been built since this map was made a year or two ago. So I guess I would say, in the tradition of the people who came here 10,000 years ago and learned and understood their environment and laid out their trail networks accordingly, then great pleasure I have today is doing the same thing. I mean, there are things like this trail here, the Kinwood Heritage Trail, goes over that huge railroad bridge in Manioc. That was an amazing achievement. And now it's being extended down into Fairmount Park and along here and right to all the trails here, and it'll come in. So that's really where we are. And the last thing I would say for further reading, this work I discovered when working on the 9/11 trail. It popped up. It's called Indian Paths of Pennsylvania, or Historic Indian Paths of Pennsylvania. It is online in Google Books if you can't find it. It describes many of the trails and describes how people use them and where they were. There are maps being put together by PennDOT and the State Historic and Museum Commission, State Historic Preservation Office. Creating a data set approximates the location of the paths, historical accounts, associated date information about Indian towns and rivers. And the reason they're doing that is that when projects are done today, we do take a look at what's there and try to respect it. So that's very helpful. And then the other thing is just the importance of understanding this is being hidden by a toolbar here. But anyway, finding out just that the paths really played a significant role in the early settlement of Pennsylvania. Obviously, here's a path, probably the width that they were, and they were also used obviously for war. But to understand that they really laid the network for what we have today, in the same way many of the rail lines are laying the network for our regional trail systems. It's really great to know about them and then also to get out and enjoy them. And I invite you to join me. You'll get information on that about the tour in September. And thank you for your attention. I'll be glad to try to answer any questions that I can.
Thank you so much for that, Bob. I'm going to second the sentiment of the rail worker that you saw on the train and say that I'll never look at things the same again. It's amazing to just be able to look around and know the history of what's beneath your feet. So thank you so much for sharing that with us.
My pleasure.
All right, it looks like we have one comment question already in the chat from Mary Ann Eves. Rose Valley's beaver is still missing. Okay, so unfortunately it has not been found
Uh,
yet.
Sorry to hear that.
But information there about that beaver statue, if anyone is interested. Thank you for sharing that, Marianne. We really appreciate it. All right, it looks like David Rose has raised his hand. Go ahead, David.
Good day, and thank you so much for your words and your work, Robert. It is amazing to hear uh, just such amazing stewardship and opportunity that still exists for preservation of pathways. I know when I was studying at Penn under Randy Basin and the late Frank Matero, some of the conversations of around landscape conservation was a little bit distant. So it's good to see architects like yourself doing landscape work. It's obviously part and parcel. Um, I've thought for a long time I'm on the board for the Appalachian Trail Conservancy, and we think about like that connectivity from the city to the countryside, and I'm wondering how maybe residential clusters, so like social housing and different sections of the city that have maybe more housing development are connected through the trails. Is it done through signage? Is that a conversation that's still happening? I'd just love to hear some of your insights into connectivity inside of Philadelphia County, like inside of the city proper.
Certainly. Our city planning commission keeps up to date and revises every year a map of the city trail and greenway network plan. And they're actively using that to make more and more connections. So that's something I think you can see it online if you go to the city planning commission's website. If not, I could get a copy. You could ask for that. But no, that's how they're doing it. And they every year they evaluate things like the uh, Fern Rock American Trail, for example, would connect all the people up and down the center of the city, North Philly and Allegheny and other neighborhoods like that, to the city's park and trail network. I would say that one of the things that we are gifted with in Philadelphia is that the people that laid out our park system um, did it really understanding watersheds. The parks were really put together, starting with Fairmount Park and then through the 1910s and whatnot. You know, you had the Pennypack, Coney, Kessing, Cobb's Creek, and there was a big plan in doing all of that. And part of it was not doing a park like Central Park. Uh, I jokingly call Central Park is a great park, but it's not a connected greenway park. It's a big rectangle of preserved land, actually recreational land, I would say. It's not, And it's critical to the joy of life of so many people. But the thing that has happened in New York is now you have a trail that goes all the way around the island. I see my great friend and colleague David Rose is online, and I was visiting uh, relatives on the Upper West Side of New York one time, and I was able to bicycle all the way down the island, around and over the bikeway on the Brooklyn Bridge, down the Ocean Parkway bike trail, which is very old, all right, to his neighborhood in Brooklyn. And that kind of connectivity is really important. One of the big things that's happening this year, it is extraordinary, is the opening of the swing bridge on the Schuylkill River that will allow people to go from central Philadelphia and Grays Ferry directly on trail on the Schuylkill River Trail to Bartram's Garden and beyond. And what that also does, conversely, is all the people that live in King Sessing and Southwest Philly will be connected to our whole park system. And I know what a difference that makes. Um, just last night, I was at a lecture at the Athenaeum, and I came back and just rode up the parkway to see what was going on. We still had an hour of daylight, and came back on the Schuylkill River Trail to where I live, in Powelton Village. Now, when we moved to Powelton Village, there was no Schuylkill River Trail. But one thing that attracted me was I knew from working on trails that that was going to happen, which it has. And so it's all the work that's going along on our Delaware River Trail, um, from all the new parks like Borsky Park and Pennypack on the Delaware, and one after the other are all happening to reconnect people to the Delaware River through Bridesburg and Frankfurt and Tacony and Holmesburg and Torresdale. All those people, and if you look at old books like the Arcadia book series, you'll see that they all had boathouses and they all got bulldozed away for chemical plants and whatever, and all that's coming back now. So there's a tremendous amount of work in our Philadelphia Trail Plan to reconnect people to natural areas and to each other and to the things they need to do. So we have a really great setup of people here, advocates, agencies, nonprofits, all working on our trail network and our walkable, bikeable network, along with public transit to really give people access to everything.
Thank
Yeah,
you
that
for
connectivity is so important. Absolutely. I'm sorry, David, did you have a
I would just say
follow-up
one
or?
one reason I do
Mhm.
tours. In fact, I have one coming up a week from the 28th, not next week, but the beginning of the following week. Wait, June. It's the last Tuesday in June. Is sometimes I have a lot of fun with tours. 2 years ago, I, I I spend time looking at maps at night. I mean, other people are watching ball games or whatever, but that's what I'm doing. And in fact, my wife comes up in my study and says, "Are you still looking at trolley porn?" I have all trolley maps and other stuff. So I love that. She's really creative. But I put a trip together and I sent the invitation to about 10 people. And the title of it was Take SEPTA to Chesapeake Bay. How do you do that? You can. And the answer is there's a train that goes down weekday mornings from Doylestown to Philadelphia, all the way to Newark, Delaware. So I got a call back from Jen Doherty, who's the head of long range planning at SEPTA. And she says, "Is this a Bob joke or is this for real?" And I told her, she says, I'm going to tell my entire department they can all go on your trip, get paid for the day, and they'll learn something. Like we have all this stuff that we're not telling people. And then Daniel Paschal, who's the head of the East Coast Greenway for Mid-Atlantic, came on the trip, and we got off the train. He says, "Oh my God," he says, "our Greenway is 1 inch away from the Amtrak SEPTA station." Like I didn't realize that they just paved the whole section. So we got off the train, and we rode 30 minutes, and we were in Elkton, Maryland, right where George Washington had landed. We went to that park, and then we went across Elk Neck State Forest and had a great crab luncheon in Northeast, right on Northeast River. And somebody said, "Okay, smarty pants, how are we going to get back to Newark?" And I said, "Highways are like geology. Today's layer is I-95. The layer down below that is US 40. And the layer below that, which comes right past the restaurant here, 25 miles an hour, tree shade is the old Philadelphia Pike. And we took that back to Newark, caught the train. So a large part of what's important are things that our American Swedish Museum does is tell people where things are, how to get there, how to appreciate them. Put itineraries together when you can do it, how you do it. So this type of thing is important. There are people who would be interested because they're interested in trails or Native American history. But then also, well, sure, you can go to the Pine Barrens, but that's like when someone has a party and at the bottom of the invitation says, you can take SEPTA. Well, where? How? You have to tell people. And I think that's an important thing here that a lecture like this and then a tour will tell people how to get out and take advantage of it. For people in neighborhoods, if you are in the Jefferson train station, there's a project that was done by Philadelphia Mural Arts of all people. It's a huge map of Philadelphia, and they have transit lines on there that offer a single ride, and it says the Route 38 stops at these 12 parks, and they show it right on the map. And people live in a place. So there's a lot that's already there. So a great deal of it is learning, where you want to go and also how you can actually get there. So using some of the same ingenuity that the Native Americans did to create these trails and connections, it's a matter sometimes that we don't have to wait until a big trail is built or a big transit line is built. It's a matter of knowing that you can do it.
Great. Thank you so much, Bob. I know we're running short on time, so I'm going to ask the question in chat, and then maybe we can take one more live question. But do you want to talk? You focused a lot on trails in New Jersey and Pennsylvania. You just mentioned New York, Delaware a minute ago, but excuse me, do you have any comments about other trail systems in Delaware specifically?
I do. As far as, well, let me share my screen. And here, I'll bring up a map of Delaware. That way it'll be a very quick discussion. 1 second here. Hold on. I'm clicking on Google Maps and it's not open. Try something else. There we go. Hey, let me go in, share my screen. We are. Let's go down to Wilmington, Delaware. Wilmington, as you know, is just below Tinicum Township. Here's Wilmington. And Google does have a trail layer, which I'm going to put on. Hiking. All right. As far as Native American trails, actually, I'm going to switch to terrain. Yeah, that'll read better. Good. There are a lot of things in our history of trails and transportation that this is all over the world, finding things that are so close together, but just about not quite. Probably one of the biggest examples of that is the Suez Canal. Before that was built, if you were in the Mediterranean and you wanted to come around, to the Gulf of Aqaba, you had to go all the way around the entire continent of Africa. And here's Chesapeake Bay, and here's the Delaware River. And of course, at one point, they decided to build the C&D Canal, the Chesapeake and Delaware Canal, which still carries a lot of ship traffic today. Only recently, a trail was put along, connected up the trail along the whole thing from Chesapeake City all the way to Delaware City. As far as Native American trails, this is the fault line right here. It's everything above here. You can see all the hills and what that's Piedmont, and everything below Wilmington here. This is all coastal plain. Same thing here. That's why there are big cliffs here in Elk Park, and this is all flat. But what that means is that this area here of New Sweden, creating a trail through here was not difficult. Now, in the Native American trail tradition, surveyors were sent out in the early 20th century to build the DuPont Highway, which became US 13, that runs down the middle. And the reason it did that was to avoid having all the bridges that they would have had to build. By being on the high point between the Chesapeake and the Delaware, they avoided that. So it's likely that that actually is a successor to a Native American trail that avoided all these swamps and marshes and everything. If you go down to Delaware and you really want to get a sense of the area, you can go to Delaware City. And then this road here, which is called Route 9, and it's the Delaware Coastal Heritage Greenway, goes through charming little fishing villages and swamps and Bombay Hook National Wildlife Refuge. But there's lots of historic stuff, not just there's millions of birds and other wildlife here, but there's also this historic house with its history. The John Dickinson house is further down near the end here. Where is it? John Dickinson Plantation. He was very active with the Declaration of Independence. And so you can get a real flavor for things here. There's a lot of this that doesn't feel any differently than it did 300 years ago. And there are also places like the Boondocks. It's one of my favorite crab houses. So as far as so that's a lot of what I would say about Delaware. Northern Delaware is very hilly, and getting through that is difficult in laying out trails. I did not locate, so perhaps only because I didn't take the time to do so, a map of Native American trails in this area. But I'm sure there's some good research with all the institutions here, the Hagley and others. I'm sure that information has been looked at carefully.
Sounds like a future project for you.
Oh yeah.
Pulling it together. All right. Well, thank you so much. I I know we've gone a little bit over time, but I just think that the content is so fascinating that we're all riveted by this. Um, Obviously
Lauren,
somebody went, I'm
Lauren,
sorry. Yes, Sandra.
as a last minute question,
Hmm.
did you ever go on the Goshen Trail of the Lenape? It's a small trail out of the little town called Goshen. And one of the trails also takes you back to where they did early shipbuilding.
Wow.
Wonderful trail.
I will make a note of that and look it up. Thank you.
And I actually found some relics from that trail in Goshen as you walk from Goshen to Swayton. And it goes right on to Route 9.
Right. Oh, one other thing I must mention is Southern New Jersey. Let me put the map back on for one moment. Let's go to Cumberland County. You saw that these trails went down through New Jersey down to Cumberland County, New Jersey, not Pennsylvania. Okay, and there were Native American settlements all through here. Many of you, I'm sure, have been to the town of Greenwich. Many of you have never heard of it. But Greenwich was one of the 5 towns in which tea was dumped or burned, along with Boston and others as well. But in Greenwich is their prehistorical museum.
Yeah.
And it's right here. Which building? Anyway, but this was an area, obviously, and we were fortunate, my wife and I, because we started going there a long time ago, and I've been a life member of the Cumberland County Historical Society for one time. So there's fast land like this where people are settled, and there's all this marshland. But Alan Farman, who called himself an avocational archaeologist, he knew more about the area than anybody else, but he'd never gotten a degree. Well, he was respected, and they've named the prehistorical museum after him, but the collections of what they have of all the materials from different people, and he knew every place where people lived and who traded with whom, and a lot of that was recorded. But that is definitely a visit. If you haven't been here, there are 4 or 5 museums in Greenwich. Their library, there's a nautical museum, there's the prehistorical museum in a town of just a couple hundred people.
Yeah.
And it's an absolutely beautiful, quiet place as well. So, but that is a definite resource, which I did not tap into, but I'm sure they would have quite a bit to say because I remember talking with him about, he showed some things that, well, these pots aren't from this area. They came from probably around Carlisle, Pennsylvania. They were trading with the Susquehannocks and, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that's a source of a lot of information.
All right. Well, thank you all so much for joining us today. I think we're going to have to leave it there. If you're interested in learning more about upcoming programming or becoming an ASH member, I'd love to, you can reach out to support us during our 100th anniversary. I'd love if everyone could please show their support and thank Bob so much for his time today. Thank you for sharing all of this fabulous research with us. We really appreciate it. We host these programs every third Thursday of the month, and our next one will be a tour of the ASHM 100 exhibition that we have with our curator, Brett Peters. So I hope you all could join us. Oh, and also this Saturday coming up is our Midsummer celebration. So if you are in the area and you'd love to come in, you can celebrate with us and you can watch the FIFA game, Sweden versus Netherlands beforehand. So. All right. Thank you so much. And I hope everyone has a wonderful weekend. Thank you again, Bob. And we
Thank
will see
you.
you and we'll keep you updated on if anybody wants to join the lecture or
Yes,
the walk of
yes.
when that will be. You can join
I'll
Bob
get that over to you now
on
so we
his
can plan
trails.
well ahead. Sure.
Yeah. Great. All right. Thanks, everyone. Have a wonderful evening or weekend.
Okay. See you all later. Take care now.
Bye bye.